You are listening to First Metro Securities Philippine Stock Market Weekly podcast, where we feature timely and relevant discussions on the Philippine stock market and the economy in the hope of providing you investing and trading guidance. Here's your host.
Hi investors! This is Anjz from First Metro Securities. We're starting Love Month with another podcast about the market. For today's episode, we're diving into the highlights of January 2026. The key economic events, data releases, and market-moving factors that shaped investor sentiment and drove market trends. In the first trading month of the year, the PSEi rose by 3.2% to 6328.97. That's up by 193.91 points. As 2026 began, the Philippine equity market opened with a cautiously optimistic tone. The index stayed mostly in the green, supported by bargain hunting activity, though trading remained measured as investors gradually eased back from the holiday break. In the first full trading week of 2026, the PSEi gained 3.47% week-on-week, reflecting sustained bullish sentiment amid favorable domestic data releases. Key catalysts included an improvement in the November 2025 unemployment rate to 4.4%. This was at 5% in October. And full year 25 inflation cooling to 1.7%, below BSP's 2 to 4% target range. Meanwhile, despite peso weakness depreciating to a record low of 59.4 pesos, and BSP Governor Remolona's cautious remarks on potential sub-4% GDP growth in 4Q, net foreign buying remained resilient at 2.6 billion pesos. Geopolitical noise around the U.S. intervention in Venezuela was largely shrugged by the market, albeit this has raised concerns of political or potential retaliation by China and Russia. The following week, the market began on strong footing, extending the prior week's momentum amid sustained foreign inflows. However, sentiment weakened midweek as the peso continued to slide to record lows, reaching 59.46 pesos per USD. External headwinds also weighed on risk appetite, tracking weakness in U.S. equities as investigation into Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell reinforced concerns over the central bank's independence. Nonetheless, bargain hunting and sustained foreign inflows provided steady support towards the week's end, though profit-taking tempered further gains. The week after nearing overbought levels, the PSEi ended its 4-week winning streak, spending most of the week in negative territory, down 2.03% week-on-week. With no strong local catalysts, investors locked in gains amid heightened global volatility. Early in the week, U.S. President Donald Trump announced plans to impose fresh tariffs on select European countries opposing U.S. influence over Greenland. Losses were later paired as Trump withdrew the tariff threats during discussions at the World Economic Forum in Davos, while sentiment improved on the back of a stronger U.S. GDP final reading and October to November 2025 PCE data that aligned with market expectations. In the last trading week of the month, the PSEi traded largely sideways with a slight upward bias. Early in the week as investors remained on the sidelines ahead of the GDP release, supported by continued foreign inflows. Sentiment shifted later in the week following the announcement of weaker-than-expected economic growth, with 4Q GDP at only 3% and FY25 growth at 4.4%, triggering a sharp 2.08% market sell-off. Despite the volatility, the PSEi managed to pare losses and ended the week marginally lower by 0.07% week-on-week. Now on a bit of stock-specific news or stocks that stood out in the previous month, you have here JFC. Jollibee announced plans to separate its global operations from its Philippine business, creating 2 listed entities. There's JFC Philippines on PSE and JFC International on a US exchange. Execution is targeted for late 2027 and details remain preliminary. Hence, for now, we maintain a buy call with target price unchanged at 300 pesos. Stock went up by 4.5% day-on-day, easing MSCI deletion concerns. JFC remains a strong large-cap consumer play for us with re-rating catalysts. Also on gold stocks, metal prices, particularly gold, silver, and copper, rallied in the past month. However, by the end of January, their prices dropped significantly, with gold prices plunging to its steepest day-on-day decline in a decade. This was affected by President Trump's announcement of Kevin Warsh's nomination as new Fed chair. Warsh, a former member of the US Fed's board, is widely regarded as hawkish on inflation. This stance typically puts downward pressure on gold prices. In effect, gold mining stocks mirror the decline as reflected by Apex, OGP, PX stock prices. AT as well was affected by the broad-based sell-off in metals and weak demand in China that drove copper prices downwards. On Shell PH's steep climb in January, there was this news flow regarding Trade Secretary Maria Cristina Roque, wherein she's seeking to expand the rules on the Republic Act 8479 to allow 100% foreign ownership of oil refining and distribution companies. This follows the recent Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with the UAE, wherein ADNOC, a state-owned oil company of Abu Dhabi and one of the largest oil companies by production in the world, plans to enter the Philippines. The expanded rule allows foreign companies to directly invest in established oil distributors like Shell Philippines, especially as oil distributors rely heavily on location to drive business. Currently, Shell PH has a foreign ownership of around 39%. However, the new rule also increases competition risks, with UAE, the largest company, or Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, ADNOC, of UAE, already showing interest in entering the country. There's also ICT's rally. For ICT, the counter continues to increase as global trade momentum remains encouraging. DBS expects the 8.8% year-on-year global trade value growth to spill over until at least in the first half of this year. Also, during the month, PSEi rebalancing results came out, with RCR positioned to enter the index to replace AGI. Changes were implemented as of February 2. It's currently the second week of February, and during this week and the next week, we expect the market to trade sideways with a modest upward bias, underpinned by the release of FY25 corporate earnings. I think by the time this podcast comes out, MSCI quarterly index rebalancing results are already released, wherein there are possible adjustments to the MSCI PH standard and small cap indices. We did mention in our earlier reports that JFC is projected to retain its place in the MSCI PH Standard Index, easing earlier concerns of deletion, while Apex and Maynilad could be added to the small cap index on the back of stronger market capitalization. Changes will be implemented after market close on February 27 and will take effect on March 2. Locally, focus will also be on the BSP's policy meeting. This will be on February 19, where a rate cut is anticipated. While globally, sentiment will hinge on January 2026 US inflation and labor market data, alongside insights from the FOMC minutes, which may shape expectations for the trajectory of global interest rates and investing strategy. All right, and that's it for today's podcast. If you found this helpful, make sure to follow us on our socials. That's First Metro Securities on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and FirstMetroSec on TikTok. If there are any topics you'd like for us to cover, feel free to send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in and have a profitable month ahead.
Thanks for listening to First Metro Securities Philippine Stock Market Weekly podcast. Don't forget to follow us to get first dibs on our new episodes. For more up-to-date market news and info, exclusive content, and the opportunity to connect with your fellow Filipino investors and traders, join facebook.com/groups/FirstMetroSec and be part of the First MetroSec family.
Hello? Hello?
Podcast Network Asia.
First MetroSec is providing this podcast as a general market commentary. Reference to any specific security, product, or entity do not constitute as an offer or a solicitation of an offer to buy or sell any financial instruments or to participate in any particular trading strategy. The statements, comments, views, or opinions expressed by the hosts are subject to change without notice, and First MetroSec is under no obligation to update, amend, change, or correct any of the statements, comments, views, or opinions expressed. The statements, comments, views, and opinions expressed by the guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the view of FirstMetroSec. FirstMetroSec disclaims any liability arising from reliance on or reference to any information obtained in this podcast.
The views and opinions expressed by the podcast creators, hosts, and guests do not necessarily reflect the official policy and position of Podcast Network Asia, the hosts of the program, or other programs of the network. Any content provided by the people on the podcast are of their own opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything.